What's up, guys? Why am I so tiny all of a sudden? Let's fix that. There we are. What's up, guys? Happy Wednesday. Wednesday, June 11th, 2010. 2010? I'm 15 years behind. I must have something else on my mind. Let's reset that. Welcome in to the Nocturnal Knockout for Wednesday, June 11th, 2025. As always, I'm your host, Rob Viahos, Rob's MV, or whoever the hell that guy is in the lower third. It's Wednesday. You know what that means? It means that we're going to waste time until Dynamite, or even bleed into Dynamite, to be honest with you, a little bit this week. And we're going to talk about the week in pro wrestling, but we're going to do it Nocturnal Knockout style. We're going to bring in some history. We're going to take one little thing that happened this week and extrapolate it onto years and years. And we might even have a countdown at the end. How's life, guys? How you been? Hope you've been doing good. Hope you enjoyed Raw on Monday. Wasn't that like the most active Raw we've had all year? Tons and tons of fallout. You guys are already getting into it in the chat. Corey is happy to see Jey Uso go bye-bye, at least in terms of being the champion. He thinks Gunther should have never lost it at Mania. So you guys seemingly are okay with what happened Monday night. I did see that, E, and I thought only of you. So we're going to talk not so much about Jey Uso, to be honest with you, on this show. We're going to talk a ton about Jey Uso. We'll mention it. It's obviously foregrounding everything that we're talking about here. But what we're really going to do is we're going to break this down historically. Now, what are we going to break down historically? Well, we're going to break down the history of title changes on Raw or SmackDown. Now, there's going to be some parameters we're going to say here, because this would honestly be like a 7-hour show if we were to really do it in a full-length way. This is going to be much quicker, but we are going to go over every single instance of a legit title change happening on the weekly WWE shows. And more specifically with that, we are going to break down how long title reigns tend to last whenever the titles are won on quote-unquote free TV. See, on Monday, there was a lot of discussion. Some people were noting that we haven't had a short title run for one of the main titles in quite some time. We haven't had a title not change hands at a major show, and we certainly hadn't had a title change hands on a Raw or SmackDown in a really, really long time. A lot of that has to do with the fact that we've had like one champion for 5 years. But even at that, there's been some title changes here and there. I want to break down exactly what that looks like when you win it on a Raw or SmackDown, the way Gunther just did. For my money, it seems like the world is sort of back to normal with Gunther being the champion. I don't know if he's saving that for Goldberg. Don't really know how the title comes off of him now. That's my one issue with it. Is it a Sami Zayn situation? Is there a cash in later? I don't know. I had Seth getting that title next, so that throws off my personal plans and my personal booking. Not that that actually meant anything to the show or anything like that, but it does alter at least our internal plans of what we can project is going to happen. I want to set some parameters, though, on what we're talking about. When I talk about titles, major world titles that are won on a Raw or SmackDown, they're not all created equally. In fact, there's some that I'm going to completely discount from what it is that we're about to talk about. Like, if it's a Money in the Bank cash-in, with a few exceptions, RVD, John Cena, some others, with a few exceptions, that's not really a match. That's a cash-in. So we're not going to count that because that's a completely different thing. Also, there's a lot of situations, see, like Kevin Owens in 2016, Randy Orton in I want to say like 2009, around that era. There are several times where a title is won on free TV in the form of like a battle royal or a gauntlet, or usually something like that, some kind of multi-person situation. That's not what I'm talking about here. What I'm talking about here is actual matches They're not always scheduled in advance, but they generally are. I'm talking about an actual match that happens on Raw or SmackDown. And when a title change actually occurs, not a dusty finish, not something that's kind of weird, not something we have to undo, something that we're not so sure about, something that we're not sure if it really happened. We're talking actual title changes. We're going to break down exactly throughout all of history, or the history of Raw and SmackDown, how televised title reigns actually go. Before we get started, though, I have a little bit of a quiz for you. Do any of you have any idea what the first title reign is that we're going to be breaking down and discussing and looking at the length of? The first ever title change that happened on one of the major American shows, Raw or SmackDown. See if you guys can put it in the chat while I take some sips of water. And stay active in the chat the whole time. He's talking about Seth showing up at Triple Mania. Don't know if that's going to happen, but obviously it's a possibility. And if you really are feeling generous with the chats, you can go ahead and send one of those super chats. Once again, re-enabled. So if you like this content, if you would like to see more of it, if you'd like to see it a little more frequently, do all the things you're already doing. Like, share, subscribe, tell people about it, harass people about it, crash feeds in public with our streams going. I want you to do all of those things. But on top of that, if you're feeling extra generous, you can always send us a good old-fashioned super chat. That is the best way to directly support the show. Now I'll take that drink of water and put myself on mute. I had to go to a doctor's office yesterday, and I left my good water bottle in the doctor's office, and I've just been furious about it since. So I got the backup water bottle that has this little, which is really annoying, especially to the audio-only audience. I'm going to try to hit mute every time I take a sip of water, but I'm on here talking for an hour, guys. Sometimes I'm just going to have to take a sip of water. I need to find a way to bring in callers to this show. I need to have you guys calling in. I think less of me and more of you might not be good for the audio experience, but definitely be good for my sanity. We need to upgrade. We need to go back into radio for this. None of this digital stuff. Let's go back into radio. You know when radio was like really popping? Radio was really popping back in like 1997. I mean, it's popping before that, but if you're like a band and you got your song on the radio, if you're a DJ in like 1997, you're in pretty good shape. Now, if you're a wrestler at the top of the card in 1997 in WWE, things weren't quite as good for you. I mean, people were getting hurt, fatal four-ways were happening, people were losing their smile. And unfortunately, Sid had to defeat Brett on the February 17th edition of Monday Night Raw. Yep, boss, right on cue. Almost right at the same time. There are a lot in WCW, and WCW has a lot more infamous ones, I think. Some of the ones I'm going to talk about, you're going to go like, oh yeah, I remember that one totally. And some of the other ones are going to be infamous. But yeah, WCW would make this a lot easier. We could just do this on WCW in the year 2000, and I think it would be amazing. But no, let's start with Sid. Now, if you trace the WWE title picture at the beginning of 1997 to the end of 96, it's a total mess that's mostly caused by Shawn Michaels. I love that most of the problems they had can be attributed to one man and one man alone. That was Shawn Michaels. Shawn Michaels had to lose the title so he could win the title at the Rumble, but then he couldn't keep the title because he lost his smile and had to do moonsaults off of his stuff and all of that good stuff. Well, all that said, we had to get the belt on Sid. And if you know anything about Sid and his title reign, it wasn't good. Okay, Sid was the definition of a transitional champion when those things didn't even really exist as much. When we get to the 90s, I want to say the only real transitional champion was probably Bob Backlund with his stuff with Bret Hart. The 90s is not an era where we really have a lot of transitional champions. Obviously, you get them in the way back time because the guy has the title for like a month. That way, you can keep it on one baby face, and then you can keep it on another babyface. You're spoiling my gimmick here, boss, but you're absolutely right about what we're going to do next. Now, Sid's reign here. Let's look at it. It lasted a total of 34 days. This title was put on Sid so he could drop it to Undertaker, although looking back, even at the build going around there, it's not exactly like Undertaker was the super tippy top guy. And Austin and Brett has been remembered as the main event, but that wasn't the main event. Listen to guys like Bruce Pritchard talk. They didn't really have the headliner at this WrestleMania. So Sid, by default, had to assume this role. Never mind that a few months prior, he had missed a flight to Puerto Rico to promote the Rumble match, and he was extremely irreliable as a champion. They needed him to have the belt to get into WrestleMania. Now, this WrestleMania main event is not one that we talk about for its in-ring prowess at all. We talk about Brett and Austin like crazy from that WrestleMania. The only thing we talk about when it comes to Sid and Undertaker is if Sid had a dump in his pants. And I think history has cleaned Sid's soiled legacy on that topic, but it's still the only thing we can talk about. Part of the reason why it's the only thing we can talk about, to be honest with you, is because that match is horrible. That match is like them trading moves, going very slow in circles. Shawn Michaels is on commentary, just trolling the entire world. Bret Hart's out there bitterly getting involved. WrestleMania 13 is a dark, dark period. But there were brighter days on the horizon, as the boss was pointing out. All of that happened in 97 was setting the stage for 1998, when one man, perhaps you've heard of him, perhaps you've ever watched any podcast that Zach Haydorn has ever done, perhaps you've read a book that Zach Haydorn has read, and you would know exactly who I'm talking about. I'm talking about Stone Cold Steve Austin. By the time we get to 98, specifically WrestleMania 98, Stone Cold Steve Austin is the man. Now, as the man, as the face of the company, as the guy in the mold of Hogan and Bruno, you would have assumed that Austin's first title run especially would have been one of these multi-year title reigns. Well, that wasn't exactly the case. After winning the title at WrestleMania, inexplicably in a first blood match, after Foley and Taker have torn down the house, Austin loses in a first blood match to Kane and gives up the title. Now, as most of you probably know, there was not a Kane title reign to be had. In fact, have we ever had a Kane title reign? Maybe in 2010, the big gold belt, I want to say he held that and beat Undertaker a few months in a row for it. But Kane's never really had a sustained run at the top with the top title, even though he spent most of his career near the top of the card. But his moment in the sun, it only lasted one night. What's up, Fernando? It lasted one night, which I assume was June 28th. That would have been the King of the Ring pay-per-view, 1998. Very infamous show. And Austin has talked about the fact that him and Kane were just straight up outshined by Undertaker and Foley in that cell. What I think less people remember, that Undertaker and Foley ran out during that match and actually had run-ins in that match. After having that brutal Hell in a Cell match, they ran out there. That's right. He held the ECW title. That is right. Won that very quickly, too. Record time he won that in. Forgot about the ECW belt, boss. ECW belt, by the way, will make somewhat of an appearance on this list, but not exactly included. Now, this run by Austin lasted only 90 days. So if you were watching back in 1998 and through about the first half of 1999, you would have sworn the only wrestlers in the company at the top of the card were Austin, Undertaker, Kane, and occasionally Mankind. But really, it was all about Austin, Undertaker, and Kane every week. To the point that they are in a triple threat at Breakdown 98. What an iconic show, Breakdown 98. And they both pin Steve Austin. They give him the old double pin. And the titles actually remained vacant until you have the whole thing that they did with the Hill Run and got the title back on the Rock, got the title onto the Rock for the first time. They did it several times. Austin doesn't have a lot of sustained runs. Austin's big sustained run, and we're going to talk about how that got dipped into a few times too. Austin's really sustained run is not till he's a heel. He has long periods of not having the title. This whole thing about WWE being a babyface promotion doesn't even extend back to the Attitude Era. It actually ended, I think, in the New Generation. If it has, that's a good theory. The staph infection, he had the wrapped up arm in those matches, and they really made a deal about Austin not being at 100%. I wonder if it's as simple as him just simply feeling better the next night, and maybe the meds kicking in, the antibiotic kicking in, and they're able to run with him again. I think Pritchard and the people that would have talked about it have just said it was something to do. It was something shocking. It was something hot-shotting. And as you could see in the Attitude Era, it kind of made sense to occasionally do these title changes. And I think that Russo has taken this concept too far, but him and Bischoff have both spoken about the fact that Kane was going to light himself on fire. That actually has probably more to do with it than anything, Azan. You know what, Azan? I think you're dead on there into why they had him drop the title, because Kane's like, I will set myself on fire. Yeah. So he did that. And so there's a few things at play though. Let's camp out there for a minute. Because again, Bischoff and Russo have both talked about the fact that the pay-per-view was not necessarily the biggest master that they were serving. Those guys, specifically those two guys who are in charge of delivering numbers, but not exactly the entire bottom line of the company, the way a Ted Turner or Vince McMahon may be. I guess WCW is really not a company that way, but you get the idea. Like, I don't think they regret necessarily having the big Georgia Dome show and having Goldberg win that title. We'll talk about Goldberg and I think he was involved in a little bit later. But I think there was some intentionality. And if you recall, in the Attitude Era, there's actually a lot of pay-per-views with indecisive finishes. And those who were with the company have talked about this as well, that the pay-per-views then started becoming the house shows with the big indecisive finishes, with the big heat finishes. That sort of the business model kind of got played with quite a bit. They were, Azan, and that is, let me highlight that comment. Pay-per-view undercards were the shit during 1998. They really were. So here's the dirty secret about the Attitude Era. And I think I always say WWE won when they figured this out. Like, this is when they put them away. If you look at it in like 98 through 99, the undercard is terrible. It's trashy. It's tacky. It's all the things, like all the negatives of the Attitude Era are all going down on the undercards. Meanwhile, and the main events are great though. The main event's such a hot scene. You've got Austin, McMahon. Eventually we'd go tired of the Undertaker stuff, but it kind of hasn't happened just yet. That was that portion. When you go to WCW at the same time, the top of their card is a mess. It's a bunch of Hogans and Nashes and power plays and all this. Meanwhile, on the undercard, you've got the cruiserweights, you've got all the entertainment happening with the luchadors. You have really entertaining stuff happening on the undercard. If you notice, in the year 2000, when basically the WCW midcard transfers over to WWF and you get the Radicals, and I'm not saying it's because Austin left, but I think there became a little bit more room at the top and the main event scene freshened up a little bit. They are just on a tear in 2000, and that's what really put them away. But the undercard in the Attitude Era is terrible, and that should always be pointed out because, look, I'm a kid of the Attitude Era. I would not be on here on this mic talking to you guys if it wasn't for the Attitude Era. But it's got its faults and it's got its flaws, and it's not perfect. And the undercard in the first couple of years is a perfect example of something that was imperfect during this most beloved time. But let's stay in this most beloved of time. Let's kick the title down the road. I talked about 98. We've got the title vacancy, which leads to the rise of The Rock, which is a really good babyface rise until Vince Russo swerved us, bro. And The Rock is the corporate champion, but he's got a foil, and it's not Austin yet. That is saved for WrestleMania. No. The Rock's foil was none other than Mankind. And you have, which is maybe, we'll talk about this later, the most iconic title change. Let's start that sentence over again. What you have on January 4th is maybe the most iconic title change ever on WWE television. Now, I call this January 4th. It actually happened December like 28th or something like that, but it aired on TV a week later. And for most of these, especially when we start getting into some SmackDown stuff, I mostly stick with the date that it was aired on and not the date they held the title because, I mean, whatever. But with Raw, it's a little bit different. With this week's a little bit different. So you're going to see on the screen a little bit of variability of the dates. But for only 20 to 26 days, depending on when you think the title change started, Mick Foley held his first ever title in a huge moment on Raw. First of all, go back and watch that January 4th Raw. There's so many Attitude Era moments that happen on that night. There's tons of things that happen on that night aside from the title change. Say what you want about Vince Russo, but they were booking to win on that night for sure. Now we all know the legend about what was across from it. Look at it. They got the finger poke of doom happening on the same night. Sure, Mick Foley will put butts in seats. It backfired on Shivani. It's WWE lore. They win the war. Yada, yada. But like I said, the title reign only lasted for 26 days. The belt went back to The Rock at the Royal Rumble, where Mick Foley traumatized I cannot speak. Mick Foley traumatized his children. Remember that? It's all documented on Beyond the Mat when he took like 14 chair shots from The Rock to the head at Disneyland. So that title reign began on January 4th. Oh yeah, DX tricked HBK, and then like HBK was like beat up and all bloody in the snow too. There's also stuff happening in like the Undertaker's lair. I want to say that's when the miscarriage angle happens. There's a lot going on that January 4th edition of Raw. But speaking of brutality, as you put there in the chat, Fernando, saying that was brutal. The test case as to why title reigns should just be short, people often reference Mankind and Rock because they just kind of held the title back and forth every 2 weeks. I'm not even putting on here like Halftime Heat, which is when the title changed back from there. You got the Valentine's Day Massacre. Sometimes the title was vacant. There was a lot going on. But the next time the title did change hands on free TV was on February 15th of 1999, when The Rock finishes the hot potato before Mania and Austin. So the big title win when Austin gets his title back at the raging climax, that came off of a Raw win by The Rock, which if you go back and watch the programming, it really does feel like after that February 15th, which again is right after the St. Valentine's Day Massacre, which I can argue is the real WrestleMania of that year. That's when it started settling into this Rock Austin main event, which, as we talked about before was more of a proxy for Austin versus McMahon. Austin versus Rock as a real head-to-head issue doesn't really come into play until their last couple of WrestleMania matches. But as you can see here, Rock held the title for 41 days. So Rock going out of WrestleMania is a 3-time champion. It has the total of like 70 days that he's been champ, and he's a 3-time champ coming out of that whole ordeal. I think it did help in terms of like gaining up his resume. Because if you remember, like a year later, he already was tied with Bret Hart and Steve Austin for like 5 title runs. It's like the most in company history. The guy was 27 years old, had just barely been there. Charlotte Flair is very impressive by The Rock's early 1999 run for sure. Moving it forward, later that June, Austin and The Undertaker had to have their big blow up. Now, this is happening in a lot of context here. This is in the middle of first Vince turning face, then Vince turning into the higher power, and then Austin becoming the CEO, and then selling all his shares, but all of that stuff eventually culminated in this match on Raw. Day after the ladder match, right, where it was the boss man, right? Boss man was raising the briefcase. After all that, a bazillion people are watching Raw that night. And it's funny, but it's one of the last two Austin Undertaker matches of this Attitude Era run, and it's finally a match they had chemistry in. Austin and Undertaker feels like it should make sense, and it feels like every booker till the end of time would have booked that throughout the Attitude Era, and Vince pretty much did from 98 through 1999. But they always had this weird lack of chemistry. You know, like Orton and Cena kind of have that weird anti-chemistry with each other. That was how Taker and Austin were. SummerSlam match wasn't the greatest. I think honestly, like their match in '97 might be one of their best on pay-per-view. But this one was pretty good too, and this was high energy. And like I said, a bazillion people were watching. Austin basically has it for the remainder of the summer until SummerSlam. Now we all know the legends of SummerSlam. Did Austin not want to drop the title to Triple H? So he'd only drop it to Foley. Is the other more conventional story that they wanted Jesse Ventura to be holding up a babyface as champion, so that's why they didn't give it to Trips on that night. I don't know. As a Trips troll, I would like to think that Austin just straight up didn't want to do the job to him, but I don't know. I kind of think that Jesse holding the face up was what they were going for. Now, if you read Mick Foley's book, that match, yeah, that's the match right after this, Boston. That's one that's super high energy. If you read Mick Foley's book, Jesse almost backed out of this a few times because he was getting so much criticism. I think even from like Wade and some of those guys for his involvement in the match. Now, I put all this up there to take you to the very next night after that SummerSlam match on Raw. Austin wins the title from Foley, but has it less than a month. He only has it for 22 to 24 days. But that was the start of, the game, so to speak. That was the start of his main event push. And not to say that Trips wasn't deserving of his main event push, but if you actually go back and watch 98 through 99, you could see that this is kind of a preordained guy that you understand why he had so much animosity towards The Rock. Because just like Shawn Michaels once randomly said in that promo, his shine was very much stolen by The Rock. Very, very much. And it was even then, I think you could look at, well, it's Triple H's time. It's supposed to be. This is where we're supposed to be. Now, it's the Attitude Era. There's a lot more competition. And he's not quite the son-in-law yet. So I'm not going to say that it's just this full-on kind of he wasn't over kind of thing. But there is a little bit of a forced hand. You guys remember who he lost that belt to? It was a lot, Fernando, and I was a little kid back then. I was a young teenager, so it didn't really like bother me. I thought it was kind of cool and exciting, but looking back on it, that had to be very jarring. And you understand why like the traditionalists hated the Attitude Era so much, because you can see exactly the result of it. And again, it's good television, but these titles are flipping all over the place. I will say though, I don't think the title was as devalued by these flip-flops because they generally were on top-ish guys. And the title scene was still basically the focus of a lot of these shows. Even though when The Rock became champion, there was times when The Rock stuff was on a different level than Austin stuff. Some of the Austin stuff had a little more main event. A little bit of Cena and Punk from like 2012, but not quite. So Trips actually loses the title to Vince. Yes. For all the hand-wringing about Vince Russo made himself the champion and all of this stuff, you know who else made himself the champion? Vince McMahon in 1999. Now, he only held the title for 4 to 6 days. Of course, he had to vacate it. Couldn't lose it. Similar to Russo, actually, on that one. But this is part of the face turn and all the confusing things that were happening, and you had bloodied up people, and yeah, Vince was the champion. But he did lose it for about 4 to 6 days to Mr. Vacant. Now, if this list included Mr. Vacant has won so many titles on Raw and SmackDown. Like Mr. Vacant is the GOAT on Raw and SmackDown. And on that note too, Fernando, you say you hated seeing Vince with that title. I think also, like when you look at the ECW title run that he had, that made a lot more sense. the 6-pack challenge. That's how they sorted all of this out, right? That was the September pay-per-view, as they were just pushing things to the side, pushing things off till Survivor Series as far as they could get it, to not even really deliver on that match. But again, you got to look at this. So now this is important in our timeline here. September 1999, Austin's got no neck. And they're figuring ways to work around him before he has to take his big absence. This is the first time SmackDown has entered the chat, Azan, in terms of all this, and I want to say it is because they had a title match on their first show. Or no, they didn't, right? Who would have been? Triple H versus, that was around this time period, right? Triple H versus Rock, because there's the pilot SmackDown, and then there's the actual first episode of SmackDown. And which one had Shawn Michaels in those short shorts when he cost The Rock? I don't know. And there will not be a lot of SmackDown on this list. Most of these title changes did happen on Raw, but I think this was the first major change on a SmackDown, which again, only months into the show, which is a pretty good bone to get on the show, that you can get some title changes on there. Boss confirming what Azan was saying there. All right. Now, let's go to January 3rd, 2000. Now that we all talk about January 4th, but January 3rd, 2000 is a pretty important date as well. That's when Triple H took the belt off of Big Show, and he kept it all the way through Backlash. He didn't lose it at WrestleMania. That's why I have the little X over the logo. He gets it from Trips. Trips gets it from Paul, from Paul White. Paul Levesque gets it from Paul White. And it was the right move. As much as we can slag on Triple H, and I certainly love to do that, it wasn't working with Big Show as the champion in this situation. Big Show wasn't ready. All kinds of things were wrong with Big Show. And this is the start of the McMahon-Helmsley era, and it just made sense for Triple H to be the champion. Now, as I talked about a couple weeks ago, it seems like they wanted to wait till Austin was at least around before they gave up the title. So he got it extended into Backlash. But shout out to our boy Levesque. He got to keep the title off of this Raw win for these 3 major pay-per-views and really got to build his legacy off of that. And once he held the title on this one, this January 3rd one, it's like his grip on it almost never really let go. To this day, he's still very close. He's not going to hold the title again, but he's always in the mix for a title. He's very close. January 3rd, 2000, though. Underrated day. Oh, the Reign of Terror. That's not yet. In fact, the Reign of Terror, to be perfectly blunt with you, the Reign of Terror does not figure into this list. So make whatever inferences you will off of that. Let's push it forward a whole year. The wrestling business has changed. Society has changed. If we're in October 8th, 2001, think about a snapshot of that. We see it sometimes now when people go like, "Oh, can you imagine this scenario 1 year ago?" Like there's you always put a graphic up or something like that. But now that you've had like 25 years to process it, WWE and the world, January 3rd, 2000 versus October 8th, 2001. It's just different. Everything is different. And this little title win over here by Austin actually kind of reminds me a little bit of the Jey and Gunther stuff to an extent. Now, we talked about Austin not having these sustained reigns, but he did kind of have a sustained reign in 2001, but there were some hiccups in it. So in 2001, as we all know, he turns heel. He shakes hands with the devil himself, Mr. McMahon, and Austin is the champion starting in late March of 2001. He holds the title all the way to SummerSlam he wins at SummerSlam. He gets himself disqualified. It's Unforgiven the next month, a couple of weeks after 9/11. And admittedly, the idea was to give America a feel-good moment. So we'll have Angle win the title because America. But that was not apparently part of the long-term plan. It seems like if we read all the tea leaves, Austin was basically supposed to have the title throughout the year. They just needed this one good feel-good moment post 9/11. So we got the Kurt Angle win where he had his, Austin had his hand on the apron as well. So they had the out, but they had a title change and they had a good feel-good moment in Pittsburgh. Well, on October 8th, just shortly thereafter, they weren't messing around. They were back at it. We had a big title match on Raw. And as you might remember, William Regal was out there to be like the enforcer of civility. And so that the Alliance couldn't interfere. And then he ended up interfering. And Austin ended up getting the title back. Shortly thereafter, Angle actually turns heel. You have the No Mercy pay-per-view with the triple threat and all that. But eventually you get the heel turn. You get them flipping, flopping back and forth. Well, after all this, Austin does keep the title through Survivor Series. Technically, he's like fired, but holds the title, and it's just like a babyface again, and he's okay. And holds it all the way till Vengeance 2001, where famously Chris Jericho beat The Rock and Stone Cold Steve Austin. So it was off of this run. It was 62 days. Vengeance was 62 days after this Raw on October 8th, where Jericho became the undisputed champion and ended Austin's run and ended that was the last major title that Austin would ever hold. So this run, I didn't even think about that when I put it together. This run where Austin wins on October 8, 2001 was him getting the final title of his career. That just it blows your mind to think about it. I think a lot of the retrospectives on Austin's career, because we know what came after, have sort of said, well, Austin was done. He was over it. He had the heel turn and he was so banged up, all of this. 2001, 2002. We kind of forget that in 01, he's the best wrestler in the world. And like, it seemed like there were years and years that they were going to still invest in him. He just kind of broke down. Like, by all accounts, he's supposed to like main event with Brock like 4 years in a row after this. It would have made sense, Fernando. Like, that seemed like the way that era should have culminated. Or the other thing about that, Fernando, as well, is I really would have liked, I know Booker T was involved in the finishes here, but I really would have liked to have seen a little bit more WCW or non-WWE representation in that whole Vengeance soup. Like, at that point, Jericho was never considered a WCW guy really in the build-up in part of the invasion. In fact, it was really part of his character that he wasn't a WCW guy. They toyed with it a little bit in the build, but not much. Let's fast forward an entire year. Let's go to the fall. Actually, let's go forward 2 years. So let's give some context there. October 2001, we do not get a title change like this on free TV for 2 years. But when we get a hell of one. Let me tell you. September 18th, 2003, Brock Lesnar becomes the Iron Man. Till Eddie and Goldberg and Unhappiness and the NFL took all that away from him. Remember this when we had an Iron Man match on a taped SmackDown, which I remember watching this. I had something to do that evening. And so this is still 2003. So we still have VCRs. We don't quite have DVRs yet or on demand. So I remember taping this because it felt like the biggest thing in the world. And I remember like the thing is I had to watch like the beginning part of SmackDown and that'd lead to do what I was doing. I only hit record when I left because I was afraid that there wouldn't be enough space on the tape. But regardless, this was an amazing, amazing television match. Amazing Iron Man match. I think sometimes this gets forgotten about because it was on TV. I like to always refer to Rock and Triple H as the best Iron Man match. I know a lot of wrestling people really like WrestleMania 12. I think it's pretty overrated as a match. And then we don't tend to talk about the Benoit Triple H one that happened on Raw, which the title didn't change hands, but was an amazing match in itself. This Iron Man match, unsurprisingly, between Angle and Brock was amazing. And it might be actually like their great match because they have the really quick thing at SummerSlam 03. But it's not really a match. And their match at WrestleMania 19 is really good, but it's just so remembered for the botches. I think this match is their ultimate like culminated match. And this feud goes into Survivor Series, as we talked about a couple of weeks ago, and then kind of dies off after them. But this essentially, I think, is the culmination of Brock versus Angle. And if you recall back at the time period, I want to say Kurt Angle lost a sister like earlier that week. And this was always the case with these Brock and Angle matches. Like there was always such fragility with these matches even happening with the health of the competitors. And sure enough, they pulled it off. Yeah, I will die on that hill, Fernando, about that. And like, yes, I've heard people say, "Yo, it's not a bad match." No, it's not a bad match. And again, it's kind of impossible for those two to have a bad match, especially if you give them an hour. I just don't think that they did a great job of structuring it. I don't care what Bryan Danielson has to say. The match is not great. Very polarizing. We should just kind of watch along with that match. It's hard to do watch alongs now because everyone has different kind of ad-supported accounts and that kind of stuff. It's hard always to sync up. But I think we can get a good feed of it on Peacock or somewhere. We should definitely do some kind of watch along of that match and sort of declare what we like and don't like about it. Maybe we should go to another channel one of these days where we can kind of play some of that stuff. Just a thought to put out there. But that was Brock's run into the Eddie run until No Way Out. To be honest, one of the more underwhelming of the Brock runs. I mean, he mostly feuds with Bob Holly in this one, so not exactly the most entertaining stuff. So that was 2003. Let's go through a whole other evolution in WWE. And the next time we get one of these on free television, it's an odd one. I would say it's actually a fairly infamous one. And it's one that is tangentially connected to this channel because it involves people you see and hear on this channel. July 3rd, 2006. RVD is punished for his little joyride he took with Sabu. Thanks, cops. Thanks for ruining the title run, cops. Or, you know what? Think about what they found. Like, no, they had some other stuff too. But like, if he just gets arrested in 2025, well, he wouldn't get arrested in 2025. Now he's able to slang it on his Twitter. So this was RVD being punished though. They were getting the title off of RVD. I think they dealt with him with the ECW title the next night because if you recall, he sort of would parade as this being the ECW title, but he won the title from Cena at the legendary One Night Stand 06. Can't wait for the 20 year of that to come up next year. You know, I'm gonna be all over that crap. But this was really what put the title and only the title, this triple threat that you had on Raw, between it kind of cleared the way for good one, Fernando, for Edge and Cena to feud over the belt. And this is sort of one of the catalysts. They've been basically feuding since after WrestleMania, but this really kicks into gear the Cena Edge feud, which you have the two big matches where eventually this ends at Unforgiven at the TLC match in Canada. You have the big SummerSlam match in Boston, in Cena's hometown, and then you get the big match in Canada with Edge, and each one of them in true Vince fashion loses in their hometown. We've talked about it before, what a great feud that was and what a great section that was, what a little slice of that is. It all got started though with RVD and his unfortunate run-in with the law. You know, can we get that expunged for RVD? Can we get his title reinstated? I feel like that's a bit of restorative justice we could just get started on. All right, let's get some shorter runs. Let's skip forward 2 years. Now, this one, everyone on this list, Sid, not really. But most of the ones on this list, I recall, I remember when they were happening, or I just straight up watched. I was fully watching the product at this time of the next one. I do not recall this at all. I recall a lot of stuff around this, but I do not recall this at all. But yes, November 3rd, 2008, Jericho didn't get fined like he did at Cyber Sunday, but barely holds the belt for 20 days and drops it to a returning John Cena at Survivor Series. This was weird. This was like Batista-Cena ships passing in the night. So if you recall, SummerSlam 2008, Cena and Batista have that really interesting face versus face match where they both take time off after to kind of sell injuries. And it really seemed like it was good, but it was a teaser, and it turned out to be a little bit of a teaser for a WrestleMania match down the line. It was like the first, Hogan Warrior, Rock Austin, babyface versus babyface of this era, but the guys aren't quite cemented yet. But then you also have, at that same exact time period, that's when Jericho's heel character really gets over. That's with him. Remember that SummerSlam that year where he punches HBK's wife and they have that big feud and the ladder match, and CM Punk can't even get pinned for his title. That is all of that stuff. And you go to I want to say it was Cyber Sunday. It wasn't Taboo Tuesday anymore, right? It was Cyber Sunday where they bladed in the match. And this is early PG era. PG starts in summer of 08. Now, people like to think it's just Benoit or it's, something like that right at that period where they went PG. It's not till, again, like I want to say SummerSlam of 08 is officially the first PG pay-per-view, something like that. But I don't think the guidelines and guidances of PG had fully been established. And that's why you ended up with Jericho, Batista, and the ref getting fined. I don't think Austin got fined, but he was like a special guest referee at some point. But all of this ended up leading to the big return for Cena at Survivor Series. Remember they were doing the AC/DC song with the big return of Cena, and that kind of put Cena around the title till he lost it again. I think at the Chamber going into WrestleMania season. We talked about that going into WrestleMania 25. This is sort of the soup of how we got there. And if you recall, Batista is nowhere to be found by the time we get to WrestleMania 25. He comes in for Backlash to avenge with the McMahons. Another couple year switch. One that I had forgotten about, but how could I forget? That's a typo. He didn't hold the belt from 71 to 15 days. He held it from 71 to 75 days. So on May 6, 2011, we talked a lot about this time period last week. When we talked about the R-Truth main event run, the last one, not the one before, the one we're about to have. We talked about that one. This was also happening. Now, this was a real hot topic on SmackDown. Everyone likes to think of that summer as the summer of Punk Part 2. But the other thing happening on SmackDown or around SmackDown was Orton and Christian. Now, if you recall the story of all of this, so Edge, who technically did win his title on a free TV show, he beat Dolph Ziggler on SmackDown, but Dolph was only awarded the title earlier in the night, so I'm just not going to count that one. But Edge holds the title all the way through WrestleMania 27. Kind of surprisingly, actually holds on to the belt at WrestleMania against Del Rio, after Del Rio had won the ginormousest of Royal Rumbles. But we find out that he was going to retire. Now, obviously, the retirement didn't hold, and we're still stuck with some cope in our lives. But at the time, it was the big tragic send-off, and it was pretty much a downer. Yeah, I mean, it wasn't quite Bryan Danielson, but it was of similar sort of feeling. And so Christian gets sort of the hype coming out of it, and Christian gets the title. And this is just a couple of days after that pay-per-view. Orton beats him on SmackDown. You would have thought like some smarks had just been told that they were not allowed to, like, I don't know, go outside anymore. They probably didn't want to do that. They couldn't be on a message board anymore. The smarks were so angry about Orton beating Christian. Again, this isn't like respected Randy Orton. This is coming off of like 09 Randy Orton had just kind of been face Randy Orton, but like at this point, I think fans in their minds are thinking, okay, Orton's time at the top had come. He wasn't that guy. He's just a guy that Triple H really likes. And again, he hadn't really built up those years and years of respect and admiration. And people loved Christian. It was late in Christian's career. And people talking about exactly what you're talking about there, Fernando, with the blue dot on Christian's face. And people were so heartbroken about this. Well, 71 to 75 days later, Christian wins the belt back. And I honestly think this helped really solidify both guys in different ways. This whole feud is what gave personality to Randy Orton. Even as a babyface, believe it or not, he kind of got his personality out of this feud. And this feud did wonders for Christian. To the extent that Christian was ever thought of as a main event guy in WWE, it was because of this feud. This feud was so good for Christian. This is one of the times, and I don't know what their plans were, but if WWE were to tell you on this one that, like, just wait, watch see how our stories unfold, we're telling a story, that's when it actually really was a thing. This feud is a good example for them to have to showcase that. Now, something else that happened in 2011, we're not going to reference. July 25th of 2011. Technically, John Cena beat Rey Mysterio for the title. But I don't think that Mysterio really held that title because he won it like earlier in the night against The Miz in the final of the tournament, where CM Punk was still pretty much acknowledged as champion. So I'm going to say that that's not the case. We're not going to count that one. Hold on, I got to send a text message. Okay, but we will talk about the next thing on this list for sure. Yeah, I hate that whole. I hate the whole idea of Ray dropping it. I hate the whole idea of Ray putting the title on the line in that match. Again, if you don't want to put it on Ray, I'm fine with that. You could have Cena could have beat Miz. They had feuded like 1,000 times that year. I didn't really get that one. I'm still kind of sour about that one. And I want to say Mysterio's career didn't quite recover for a while. Like, for whatever reason, this title change somehow led to him getting booed in Philly. I don't know if that's scientific. I'm just going to say that that's the case. All right, 2 years later, though, talk about something else I didn't remember. And now we're going to get a little smackdowny because, in case you haven't realized, once we get till about the late 2010s, and it was the case before then, the gold belt is basically the Intercontinental title. Kind of like Gunther's title is right now, but I would say Gunther's title maybe has a little bit more weight on it than what this one had on it. But I have no recollection, none whatsoever, of on January 8th, 2013, Del Rio beating the Big Show in a last man standing match. Last man standing. Is that right? Yeah, last man standing match on SmackDown. Do not remember that at all. I do remember Del Rio holding the title going into WrestleMania that year. I remember him being a face. I remember him feuding with Jack Swagger. I remember Jack Swagger getting arrested. I remember Del Rio holding the title. And then the next night, Dolph Ziggler with the biggest pop ever. Everyone's fandangoing. It's the night after WrestleMania 29. The Raw after WrestleMania is a big thing. They're taking over the crowd. They're hijacking the crowd. And all the wrong lessons for everyone got learned that night. What a weird night that is in pro wrestling history when Del Rio ends up losing this belt. I mean, Dolph doesn't even get to hold it after that. He's got the concussion, and it was never really in the plans. This is wild. Brutal, brutal times. But it wasn't until another 2 years that we got another title change. I'm pretty sure you guys remember this one because I remember this next one very, very specifically. Now we're going to start getting into the modern era. We'll flip into the modern era. December 14th, 2015. Roman finally gets cheered by that Philly crowd that booed him a year before, but he does lose the belt in the Rumble after only 40 days. Now, this was a part of all kinds of convoluted things. So if we go all the way back to the fall, I think the scuttlebutt at the time was that Roman was going to actually start his title reign by defeating Seth Rollins at Survivor Series in 2015. Well, a match with Kane kind of changed plans as Rollins ended up injured, and we had the worst version of Deadly Games ever at that year's Survivor Series, which actually ended in a pretty cool match with Ambrose and Reigns. This was the era when Reigns really wasn't over, so they would almost give Ambrose the title all the time to get you to kind of accept the Reigns stuff. It was odd. So right after they have that match, Sheamus cashes in his Money in the Bank, pulls off a big cash in on pay-per-view, and this leads to a feud between the two of them. They actually have that horrible TLC match that was like based off of Tater Tots. I don't know if that comes before or after this. I'm just remembering that happened. Regardless, you had this big to-do on the December episodes of Monday Night Raw. It was like the last time Vince was ever really an effective heel character also, and effective to the point that he got Roman cheered. I mean, they had to throw everything in the world. He had to eat a Superman punch, and there was everything in the world. It was this week or the week before that Vince gets himself arrested. It was just all kinds of things. They did everything they can to get Roman cheered, and it worked for like 3 weeks. And by the time you got to the Royal Rumble, it was all gone. It all had dissipated. People wanted Ambrose to win that Rumble. They were mad about Triple H winning it in a very slow fashion. None of that ended up mattering. But it was 40 days to get to that Rumble, to get the belt on Triple H, which got him to WrestleMania, which was supposed to be the real coronation of Roman. But then 2 months later, there was a wellness violation, and all three Shield members held the belt in the same night. That's your 2016 history, folks. See, I was all in on like listening to The Torch and The Observer in that time period. I was all in on like full smarkiness, but also wasn't like in my early 20s. So I didn't have a life, you know what I mean? I was just there smarking out. Crazy time. So speaking of crazy times, fast forward to the next year. This is interesting because I remember this in the middle of the day. and I'm sure you guys too. You guys have been watching for a long time. November 7th, 2017. I have here in my headline, AJ saves us from Jinder and goes on a hell of a run. Now, if you remember this, Jinder had held the title since, was it right after WrestleMania? Was it like Backlash or whatever came right after WrestleMania this year? After Orton had that weird match with Bray Wyatt, then it was on to Jinder, right? And Jinder was stinking it up in the main event scene. One day, maybe the Jinder heel run will be like the JBL one, where we look back and go like, hey, that was actually pretty good. And I was kind of getting worked. Well, we are 5, 6, 7. We're about 8 years later. And no, the title reign hasn't aged any better. I don't feel any different about it. I still think it was one of the worst decisions they ever did. It hugely devalued the title and made SmackDown almost unwatchable in certain parts. It was terrible. And they were doing brand exclusive pay-per-views in this era. Ugh. God, I like that as a take as on Brock feared Jinder. I like that. So now that sets the stage. There was an international Raw. They were in the UK, if you recall. And what we were told the whole time, the reason why Jinder had to be champion, because they had these really big shows in India, and they wanted him to be the champion going into those shows. So we had to do like 6 months of him beating Shinsuke Nakamura and all kinds of stuff in order to get there. Well, like 2 weeks before they go on those international shows, I guess they just had enough of the Jinder title run. Maybe it was the Brock thing, because this was the year did they start in 2016? Did they start with it? Or yeah, it might have been 20. Brock also fears toothpaste if you've seen him smile. Jeez. He's gonna kill me if he ever sees me. They were going all in on champion versus champion as part of the Survivor Series gimmick that year. Well, again, I don't know how much purchase Brock versus Jinder had. Brock versus AJ had all kinds of purchase, and this was early on this might have been the first one of the Brock versus little guy matches that were really well received throughout that run. But again, not only is this match happening on Raw, it's happening on tape delay in 2017, where this didn't really happen anymore. Like every now and then we still do get tape shows, but when do we ever get title changes at any of these tape shows? But that was the case November 17th, 2017. And WWE spoiled it too. I remember getting a notification midday right here on my phone telling me that like there was a major title change. And I think there was another title match that was advertised, but you kind of figured this was it, but didn't really believe it. Didn't believe it till I actually saw it, that they ended the god-awful Jinder run. As you could tell, I really hated that run. They ended that run, put the belt on AJ, and he held it for almost a freaking year. He held it till the build to the next Survivor Series, when he dropped it to Daniel Bryan, when Daniel Bryan lost his mind. Remember that? He went heel. He helped usher in Kofi Mania, and he became the Captain's Planet. It started with a low blows, which did got him the Brock match. But we weren't even sure what the heel run was going to be going into the Brock match, and we didn't even know that he was necessarily a heel in the Brock match. It's kind of hard to be a heel in a Brock match, especially when you're about smaller than me. So that was a tall task for them to navigate. And as they went through it, as you are saying, as Azan is putting in there, Bryan as eco heel was great. It is when Danielson really gets to cook on some of these heel runs, he is out of control good, because he really dives into the character, whether it's the Dr. Shelby stuff, whether it's this stuff, whether it's the stuff he did in ROH, some of the Combat Club stuff he did in AEW. He's an extremely beloved babyface, and I think that'll ultimately be his legacy. But God, he can really play some of these heels, and him feuding with AJ and telling people that they're fickle and getting mad at people for eating hot dogs and telling crowds off about fracking. Now, remember, like Wade Keller at the time just didn't like that WWE was taking this position as a heel position. I guess nowadays they would present him as a babyface. Or no, they would present him as a heel again. Yeah, they would have Otis Tucker. I could not think of Tucker's name like a month ago. And there was feud with all those guys. It was great. I really wish they would have done more with Rowan. But all of that, we don't really. So the Kofi Mania feels like it was Kofi versus Vince. We don't really put the Danielson element to there, but like Danielson was a more than adequate player in this. You hated that gimmick you hated the gimmick itself, or did you hate it because he was a heel? I'm curious about that. For those of you keeping score at home, your 4 hours of AEW Dynamite is about to start. About 2 3/4 of it last week was pretty good. Hated it as a heel, Fernando. Okay, gotcha. No, I get that. I think that's a reasonable take. I couldn't get enough of it. Could not get enough of it. Let's fast forward one more year. And for all the goodwill those last 2 title changes probably had, this one didn't. You guys remember this one, right? Debut SmackDown, network TV, huge title match. Brock's actually wrestling on TV. He never does that. Brock versus Kofi. They actually did a good job. People don't remember Kofi's title run because of how it ended and the follow-up of the ending. Kofi had a really good title run. Those matches with Orton and the program with Orton, I think all that was done really well. It was awesome. Why did Brock get I want to say, well, he was the Money in the Bank, but that was I don't remember the build to that now. I want to say it was just kind of announced, or well, Heyman had come over to SmackDown with Brock. I don't know. I don't remember. All I remember was him was getting squashed in a few seconds as the big build for the Cain Velasquez squash in a few seconds in Saudi Arabia. And on top of that, this should have been a significant title run, though, in terms of how Brock lost it 184 days later. He ended up losing it in the Performance Center in front of no people to poor Drew McIntyre. And technically, that's not even the main event of that show, because I guess Big Show Challenge is right after that. But that was that title run. That was that set. And I said the title run was good. The ending of it was horrible. And then, like, they didn't even acknowledge that Kofi was a former champ. It was like a little bit in the Rumble, they kind of acknowledged it, and a little bit like 2 years ago. And so it killed the idea of Kofi's title run being anything, because like they kind of gendered him, but his title run was nothing like Jinder was. That's a good point by E, where he said Kofi got it 6 months, Jey got 2 months. And on that, I think Jey was a much more like worthy champion in terms of like how he had been portrayed before. Kofi, they really had to juice up with that Elimination Chamber match and all those gauntlet matches. Sounds like Ospreay and Swerve are opening the show on AEW. Don't go watch that. Keep me in your ear. We're in 2019, guys. We're getting close to the end. All right. Now we have the first appearance of a Thunderdome world title change. I really didn't remember this either. I didn't remember Drew's title run being interrupted that much, but it was. It was interrupted by Randy Orton at the Hell in a Cell pay-per-view. And then a few weeks later on Raw, McIntyre gets the belt back. I don't remember this at all. I know that McIntyre's first title run, the one he had in front of no people, I know it was good, but I think just the association with the time, it just is like a blind spot. And I think maybe it's that whole 2020 is maybe a blind spot for some of us. But this lasted into 2021 when The Miz, of old people, ended up cashing in. Because the only way The Miz can win his titles is by cashing in. Remember Randy attacking Flair, HBK, and Big Show in the dark with the night? Yeah, they were killing all the legends with camera chicks. And Christian is kind of back in that era. Triple H kind of wrestles his last match as a part of all that. Yeah. Maybe the last like super Orton heel run probably of his career, because I think he's so beloved now that it's hard to really make him a heel. What did The Miz do with that title? He lost it in a lumberjack match not that long after. He only had it for, I want to say, like a week. He lost it to Bobby Lashley in a lumberjack match. And remember, the whole thing was kind of set up as he was in collusion with Bobby, and then The start of 2021 is brutal. But Bobby Lashley did go on to hold the title for 196 days over that summer. Holds the title going into WrestleMania, wins at WrestleMania. Remember, that was like a shocker to people. It's the first WrestleMania with people back. And yet he had a good little run. So a lot of this idea of Bobby now is firmly entrenched as the main event guy. So he's 50 years old. I think a lot of it actually starts right there because he had already had his time. It's not like he was over the hill and there was a certain ceiling on him. And then he was kind of elevated. I think the pandemic really helped elevate him with some of the things that were going on and how they ended up positioning him right here. And actually that 196 days, that is the second most of any person on this list. Believe it or not, a Bobby Lashley title run in 2021 was the longest. But we are getting into the era of Triple H being more in charge and longer term titles and all that good stuff. He also lost this to a cash-in by Big E, which did happen on free TV, but per the parameters that I laid at the beginning, we're not going to go there. I wish the Big E title run can be done over. I mean, obviously how his career had to end was horrible, but I really wish all this didn't kind of precede that. It kind of reminds me of the Austin stuff a little bit. This is a lot sadder because he had to retire much sooner and much less potential tapped into. And I hope he comes back someday. We got Shibata back. We can get him back. But I really wish all this stuff didn't precede that big injury. All right, guys. So we're winding it down here. That means by my calculation, we only have none of these left to go. That was the last time. So think about that for a second. I'll go full screen for a second, and then I got some other stuff to show you. The last time we had one of these title changes on free TV was a lumberjack match between Bobby Lashley and The Miz. Just a silly joke of a match. Bobby Lashley wins the title. The next time we would have one of these title changes on free TV, Jey Uso, Gunther, last Monday on Raw. But, okay, so that is the breakdown. That's about 22 different title changes that I've charted out there that happened in legit-ish matches on Raw. So let's go for some takeaways from all this, some conclusions that can be drawn from this deep journey into the recesses of the history. So the longest run in this whole list was 371 days by AJ Styles. Bobby Lashley was a distant second. His longest run, obviously, of his career, one of the longest runs that we had pre-Roman Reigns, almost for a full year. And there was none of us thought he was actually going to lose the title on SmackDown that night. I remember, I don't know who it was. Was Ryan Satin still reporting at that point, or it might have been Sean Ross Sapp just said, hey, you guys are going to want to watch SmackDown tonight. And that was where the Danielson title change happened and set things into motion. But the reign isn't exactly the best. It was a good reign for him. It kind of established him as a top guy, but he was the SmackDown champion. So sometimes that would definitely limit him as the second tier champion. On Monday, I thought we were getting a title change on Monday, but that's what I thought it was going to be, Fernando. I didn't think Gunther just straight up winning was going to be it. All right, the most successful, and this shouldn't come as a surprise, is Steve Austin. 98, 99, and 2001. Every year on Raw that he was on top, so basically from 98 to 2001, he's not on TV and that much in 2000, but every year he was on TV and on top, he won a title match on free TV. Now, as I mentioned, he didn't really hold a lot of titles for very long, but he did win a lot of those title matches. Well, won 3 of them. And there was a lot of title matches that would get advertised during the Attitude Era, so there are a lot of schmodge finishes and that kind of stuff, but these are the legit ones. And he's got some pretty good scalps on there with Kane, Undertaker, and Angle. And the biggest win, in my opinion, was the win of Mick Foley. That's on the January 4th. That pop, that moment, what it meant for the company, that's the title win on free TV. Also, like, what a show that was. To get back at it, like, what a significant Raw that is. We should do that. We should do like a watch along series. I'm starting to get the idea for a watch along series. Don't know how exactly we can pan that out. Might have to talk to the higher power known as Zach Cadorn to figure out how we can pull something like that off. But I think we should do some watch along stuff. All right. Now I'm going to say, in my opinion, the most significant reign was Triple H's first reign of terror, not the actual reign of terror, but just the matches he got to have as a result of winning the title on that Raw. The 2 Mick Foley matches at the back-to-back pay-per-views. Also, the tag match they had leading into the Royal Rumble. Just an amazing high-energy match. It's not the greatest main event. It's not the greatest Mania, but he did get to main event WrestleMania off of this. And then he got to have a major match with The Rock where he eventually lost the title with all the top people involved. And all of that stuff is super hot, super big business. I think Triple H benefited probably the most, with the exception of one person. Let me save this to the end. The person who really benefited off of losing the title on free TV was actually Christian. Orton beating Christian was the best thing that ever happened to Christian. It galvanized the fans in his corner, even though he eventually kind of turned heel out of it, but it made you sort of pay attention to all this. Like, the backlash mattered. The feud was really good. This feud only gets subsumed by what they were referencing on Monday night, because the Money in the Bank, the Summer of Punk, John Laurinaitis coming, all of that stuff clouds the second biggest storyline in the company at the time, which is this storyline. And obviously it's overshadowed by The Rock eventually coming. You have all that stuff happening all around us, but it's this match. It's this that really sets us, sets Christian into a really good place. And I think he's still kind of enjoying now as part of his big run. And, it's Father's Day season, so all respect, obviously, to Christian. Just probably the best father I know. By far the best dad I know is Christian. Ospreay's nose is bleeding, for anyone that's wondering. Sorry, I have ice. So that was our little run down the history of title changes on Raw. Now, there was a lot of other things you could say about it. Again, long reigns, short reigns. As we could see, though, they tend to not be that significant. I think these reigns are relatively short, and they tend to not be for planned out things. They tend to be for changes that need to be made. Now, some can stick long term, like the AJ would, but that one still felt like a change that needed to be made in the moment. It feels like that's when you get title changes on TV. Now, whether that was the case this week, I don't know. Whether this becomes the way the Austin one was, where there was the blip on Gunther's title reign, he actually gets it back with this, we'll see. But it's pretty exciting to have these title matches on Raw. You can't overdo them, but every few years, as we've seen as the pattern, they need to give you a title change on free TV. That way you believe it can actually happen. Now that they've done that, they don't have to do it now for another couple of years, but I think they need to keep that in their back pocket. Obviously, having Roman Reigns as your champion made that very, very difficult, but he ain't your champion anymore. In fact, anyone seen the guy? Put an APB on Roman. Like, were the attacks by Braun and Seth, are those the toughest attacks that anyone's ever had? Because everyone really seems to care about all this stuff, except for the primary target of Roman Reigns. All right, one more thing. Tomorrow, the 12th, we're going to get a 20-year anniversary. 20 years ago. What were you doing in 2005, 20 years ago? I just graduated from high school. I thought I was the coolest guy of all time. I couldn't really play an instrument, but was somehow going to make it onto the Warped Tour. It was great. And by making it onto the Warped Tour, I think it ended up being I just went to a few more Warped Tours. It was a great time. But WWE put on one of their best pay-per-views ever 20 years ago tomorrow. I'm referring to, of course, ECW One Night Stand 2005. I think the main event in 06 is more notable, and there's more notable individual matches on 06, but maybe the funnest card outside of Canadian Stampede WWE ever did was ECW One Night Stand. A show that had a feel of something non-WWE despite being a very WWE show. Something I think they were trying to accomplish and to varying results, but mostly successful with the Worlds Collide show this weekend. So the more things change, the more they say they stay the same. When WWE is trying to present themselves essentially as a different promotion. Now, eventually, we all know what became of WCECW. Nothing became of it. It was terrible. It just became the third not as good WWE brand before they really knew how to do that with something like NXT. But this has nothing to do with new brands. None of that. It was just nostalgia for the sake of ECW nostalgia. Now, the story kind of goes that there was two things that were really a catalyst to this One Night Stand pay-per-view happening. One was the release in late 2004 of the Rise and Fall of ECW DVD. Talk about something that we could do a watch along on. That is a great, great documentary. WWF, WWE documentaries are kind of hit and miss because they can be straight up propaganda pieces, which this does delve into. Thank God we got a counter doc to sort of look at that. But it's a very well put together doc. There's tons of footage, obviously, because they own all of it, and it was just awesome. Oh, one of those combined tapings. That's interesting. First live show. I had been to live wrestling at that point. Yeah, 2004. I had saw a house show. Eddie and Angle main evented. I wonder if Eddie tried to fight Angle after backstage, like he was known to do in the house show loop on that tour. Don't know if that's the case. But I was thinking, I don't want to break down match by match, and we didn't really have time for that. We had some other stuff. There was a version of this week's show that was just going to be nostalgia for ECW One Night Stand. But I thought, you know what? Let me point out some people, and this is an infinite list, and you guys can add. I want to know who really won that night. Not like who won matches, but who really won the night. Like 20 years later, who can look back and say they won the night? And I have a very quick list, and we'll go through this rather quickly. That way you guys can get on over to Dynamite. But let's examine who really won the night of ECW One Night Stand 20 years ago, tomorrow. My first nominee is the Sandman. Sandman had a hell of a One Night Stand 2005. First off, Sandman's entrance on that show, amazing. I want to say the original version did have Enter Sandman, but they've got an overdub on. I haven't watched it on Peacock in a long time, but on the network for sure. But I mean, just a million beers coming down there, the Hammerstein, the full Sandman experience, but it's in full HD, good audio quality. I mean, he's drinking beer off of women's shirts. He's just drinking beer all over the place. My guy is getting ready to main event. Sandman was fueling up to main event. It's just such an awesome entrance. Like that crowd was so into that entrance. It was very, even if you weren't around for the initial Sandman run, there's no way you could watch that and just not get a good feeling off of that entrance. Sabu was your MVP. Actually, if I recall, Sabu, Fonzie, and RVD, people that I know around here, we're all kind of around there. I like Sabu at the next year's One Night Stand when he faces Ray. Also like Sabu and Cena in 2006. Sabu's not a bad one, but okay, all this happens with Sandman. He then gets to actually main event the show, which no one remembers the match. Oh, that match is very good. Dreamer and Sandman versus the Dudleys, but it was just there wasn't really built to the match. The whole build to the show was the rivalry between ECW and mostly Raw, but Raw and SmackDown. But the other reason why he wins the night is he gets a beer from Steve Austin. Now, we've talked about a lot of times, was Austin kind of a ripoff of Sandman and this and that, but this is the chance to experience them both at the same time, unless you count the title match, the ladder match they actually had in ECW 20 or 10 years before this, but 30 years ago at this point. It's great. So Austin's doing his thing when he comes in. He's talking smack and doing his whole thing. And the whole time, a drunken Sandman is just like pushing Austin. Bear. Eventually, Austin gives him a beer to shut him up, and he's just the happiest guy in the world. I would have been pretty happy too, all things considered. Heyman always wins. But we all remember that shoot promo. It's probably one of the more memorable things that people can really recall. But that shoot promo was great. Not as good as the shoot promo prior to Survivor Series. And I'm not going to read it all out like I did. But it's before you saw these things all the time on television, at least. So he hit all the right notes. Plus, even though I don't think Heyman personally carries a lot of ECW legacy with him, he sure does take every chance to embrace it whenever it's presented to him. And I think it was very genuine on this night. And he loved getting some of those shots in, especially at this point, because he's he's almost approaching like max miserableness. Maybe he has approached max misery in 05. I think he's like fully in OVW at this point. Yeah, he said a lot. Other winners. JBL hate. If you are a JBL hater, One Night Stand 05 is like tailor-made for you. So not only does he get called out in the promo, which I think was the best line of the promo, like, again, let's not let the way the JBL title reign aged kind of cloud of how we all felt about it at the time. It felt like it was lesser than, straight up. And it just felt so affirming to hear somebody from the company say that you were only the champion because Triple H didn't want to work Tuesday. I think it was great. Now, he did his whole Sanford and Son thing and all that and respond to it, but it was great. And it was also the guys in the balcony getting really, really drunk, which I know there was some bad behavior after, but in my devious, derelict mind, there's places in history I would have liked to have been. And as long as no one was going to mess with me up there, I just want to be drinking draft beers with like Maven and JBL and Edge and all those guys up there. Those guys getting drunk up there in summer of 05 and getting ready to go like beat up some ECW wrestlers seems like the funnest thing in the world. Obviously, it wasn't so fun for the Blue Meanie, who JBL beat the crap out of. And Meanie got a little bit of a job because of it as a make good, but it didn't deserve to get beaten up there by JBL. And you're the backstory on that. That's the part of that story. That JBL had an issue with Meanie because of an inference that someone else told him about something that Meanie didn't say on the internet. Another person connected with this channel. Feels like some kind of weird cross promoting we're doing tonight. Someone else who won One Night Stand would be actually the Hardy Edge feud. This hadn't really cooked fully on WWE television. This was the start of it. This is more towards the beginning. It's earlier in the summer, but everyone knows what's up. And Edge is looking like a total POS. Hide your wives. It's Edge. I think because it just cut really deep. And Edge was so good at playing just the most detestable person in the world. So this added to the feud. They didn't have to do anything. There was no run-ins. There was nothing like that. But just this little slice that completely added to what was a really great feud. Something that also happened 20 years ago. And I'm kind of thinking we need to break that down on this show. Another winner, Mike Awesome and Masato Tanaka. They had their last great match. Unfortunately, Mike Awesome would actually pass away a little more than a year and a half or close to 2 years after this. And this match is hard to watch because they, destroy each other. They're throwing chairs at each other. They're throwing each other through tables. It doesn't age well in terms of what we know about head injuries and what was the fate, obviously, of Mike Awesome. But it turns out just a blowaway match and maybe one of the best matches they had in a legendary series. For it to happen on a WWE produced ECW show, it's just an interesting nugget right before the main event. It's the real good match on this show. I think Lance Storm and Jericho is actually a little underrated too. There's 2 more guys, or 3 more. 3 more victors, and then you can go watch your 4 hours of Dynamite. All right, this isn't very serious, but the XFL is a big winner. I love I've always tried to figure this out. Austin coming out in that XFL shirt. So I think nowadays there's a little bit of nostalgia for the XFL. They've restarted it a few times, and like we can acknowledge that some of the aesthetics, corny as they were or out of touch as they were, are kind of cool and kind of awesome. I love the idea of Austin wearing an XFL shirt because he's at the Renegade ECW show. I love the idea of the XFL stuff just being such stuff we don't speak about, such unmentionable stuff that can only be brought out in a one-night stand. Because in 2005, they never mentioned the XFL. It was one of those things that had been memory holds because it was still close enough to be such a albatross on the company. So shout out for the XFL for getting an acknowledgement, for getting to see the light of day in the mid-2000s. Another big winner, Eric Bischoff. Eric Bischoff is the heel of the entire pay-per-view. And it's he's up there. He's talking his smack. He's down there with Mick Foley. Mick Foley pulls him out. Everyone beats him up, but like all the focus is on the heat that Eric Bischoff is creating. Eric Bischoff can create quite a bit of heat just as a podcaster, but he was amazing as an on-screen character. It's something about these people like him, Vicky, Heyman. These are some of the more enduring characters that wrestling had in these time periods where they didn't have a ton of actual like wrestler characters that were super over. And he got to cuss at the end of the night. There is an unfortunate moment where Austin tells Benoit to kill this SOB. It's just eerie in hindsight, but he helped make One Night Stand to be a very, very fun, entertaining, and engaging pay-per-view. He gave you someone to root against, someone very specifically, because none of the ECW specific people were anyone you can really root against. Like even that main event with the Dudleys and Sandman, it's who you going to root against. And finally, I think the biggest winner of the night was actually non-WWE ECW nostalgia. I'm specifically referring to the Hardcore Homecoming shows that were happening that same weekend. And the great Forever Hardcore documentary, which is available online lots of places, but I think you can also outright purchase it, which serves, I don't think, as a counterpoint to the WWE documentary that they put on ECW. It just sort of some of the missing pieces. I think they're great things to watch almost in tandem to get a good slice of ECW history. Forever Hardcore is awesome because it's like so many of the wrestlers are like borderline drunk as they're talking about it, and they're still just a lot younger than obviously they are now. And so many of them, even looking at the screen, two of them have passed away and are no longer with us. So it's definitely a time capsule. But I think this show really helped launch. There was always ECW nostalgia, but it really, this show this weekend and both of these things happening really, I think, mass produced this idea of ECW nostalgia, which did wear thin rather quickly, but it was cool for the moment. And without this and without the boom of this, we didn't have the show the next year and that big match and the third brand, and might not have liked how that turned out, but I think this night was such a catalyst for all of that. I don't know if this night was a catalyst for me to talk for an hour and a half straight, but I just did that. So I'm going to have to rest my voice a little bit. But that was a hell of a fun trip through two different points of WWE nostalgia on the title matches and on the ECW One Night Stand nostalgia. I thoroughly enjoyed having that kind of show with you guys. I know sometimes we like to stick in current events. This was pure history. We like to mix it up. I'm liking our new time slot. We're having fun shows. I like the energy you guys are bringing in the chat. Don't know what we're going to talk about next week. I'm sure the news will dictate that. What I do know is it'll be same time, same place. Not sure about the same energy, but I'll try to bring it regardless. In the meantime, catch this on demand. Go to our YouTube channel. Look at all the great videos we got over there. We got, what do we got? We got Gagne talking about getting fired from Vince. We got Meanie up there. We got Dom with the daily hotline answering the hot topics in wrestling. We got Tyler and Zach. We got Tyler disparaging the Ramones last night just to bash CM Punk, which was all a lot of fun. So plenty of stuff to do over at Brass Ring Media. Members only show up reviewing the weekend of shows. Tried to get on that, guys, but the timing didn't really work out. But hopefully there's some members only stuff coming up that'll be a part of in the near future. But until then, guys, you see the socials down there. Like, share, subscribe. I will talk to all of you guys next week.